Iran's president announced something over this weekend that many of us already knew, that his country is in a state of total war with Israel, the United States, and with Europe. And now, we all have to wonder if the Ayatollah regime is prepared to sacrifice everything else in order to build 3,000 ballistic missiles every single year in order to fire them against Israel. So far, it looks like they might be ready to do exactly that. We will take a closer look at Iran's military ambitions in today's report, including their pursuit of the critical security component. And meanwhile, back home in Israel, there was a series of terrorist attacks in the Galilee region over the weekend, including 50 minutes of rammings and stabbings by a terrorist who infiltrated into Israel, used his car to ram several people, and also attacked a young woman with a knife. This attack resulted in 2 fatalities and several other people being wounded, while the attacker was also wounded and arrested, and his 2 brothers, who were also in Israel illegally, were also arrested. The IDF also announced a series of security operations in the village of Kabatia, where the attacker came from, arresting 5 additional suspects and interrogating several others. The other big story this Sunday morning is that Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu is in the United States to attend meetings in Florida with President Donald Trump and Secretary of State Marco Rubio. There is a lot on the agenda for these meetings, starting with the stalled progress in President Trump's plans for Gaza, as well as mutual concerns regarding Iran, the ongoing threat from Hezbollah, the campaign against ISIS in Syria, and an escalating dispute over the regional rule of Turkey. However, the meeting is likely to be dominated by the discussions about what to do with Iran, as Netanyahu will present intelligence reports about Iran's efforts to rehabilitate its missile program and terrorist proxy network. We need to remember that there are other meetings taking place this week, including in Doha, Qatar, where Hamas leaders are planning the destruction of Israel and the establishment of an Islamic entity in its place. Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu will also be presenting plans during his meeting with President Trump that include a calculated strangulation strategy for the Hamas terrorist organization. On that note, the IDF continues clearing terrorist infrastructure in the Gaza Strip as Hamas works to rehabilitate its terrorist infrastructure in schools and hospitals in Gaza and spreads internal Gazan propaganda. For instance, Hamas decided to hold elections for the leadership of the political bureau. We will bring you a look at what the new attempt by the Hamas terrorist organization to shape the world narrative, including its publication of an achievement booklet. In a related story, a Hamas terror cell was rounded up in Italy over the weekend. 9 suspects were arrested for raising money in euros for Hamas. And meanwhile, on the northern border, the IDF continues to strike positions of the Hezbollah terrorist organization, while an inside testimony was exposed from within the terrorist organization saying that 70% of the operatives in Hezbollah cooperate with Israel. That's a lot. It seems that Israel knows better than Hezbollah how the organization works. Welcome to Boots on the Ground. I'm your host, Yair Pinto, bringing you the whole truth about what's happening in Israel. And speaking of truth, Iranian President Masoud Pezeshkian spoke the truth over the weekend, probably by accident. Well, he declared in a speech that his country, or at least its ruling regime, is in a state of total war against the United States, Israel, and Europe. He went on to say that if the attack against us will happen once more, then they will receive a tougher response. And this raises the question about how much Iran's ruling regime is willing to sacrifice in order to build 3,000 ballistic missiles every year to fire them against Israel. Iran has already turned to the Chinese and asked for purchasing planetary mixers, which would enable fast missile productions. There are other reports of an increased pace of the missile production, even while almost half of the Iranian population lives in poverty and literally millions of people are barely surviving this harsh Iranian winter. So, what are the missiles that we are talking about? How realistic is the Iranian production plan, and why has no country ever tried to do this before, including very wealthy and powerful countries? How big is the risk to Iran's economy and to the regime's stability? We'll take a look at all of these questions and give some answers in this report. We'll also talk about Hamas's new attempt to shape the war narrative with an achievements booklet that was published under the title Al-Aqsa Flood. 2 years of steadfastness and a will for liberation. That's the title. In this document, Hamas tries to disown the atrocities of the 7th of October while also signaling to Palestinians that it is the sovereign power in Gaza. And meanwhile, IDF intelligence reports that Hamas is working to rehabilitate its terrorist infrastructure inside the Gaza Strip, and for this purpose, it uses women and children, while the United States is pushing Israel to move forward to phase B of the ceasefire agreement, and ordinary Palestinians are trying to recover from the damage of this war. But Hamas doesn't care about these people. It only wants to use them, and it continues to abuse civilians in Gaza, and despite all of this, these civilians continue to support Hamas. In a related story, according to sources close to Hamas leadership, the terror organization has begun preparations to hold elections to choose the head of the political bureau in the General Shura Council, which numbers about 50 members. These elections are meant to replace the terrorist Yahya Sinwar, who was eliminated in October 2024, as well as filling other positions. The leading candidates for the leadership position are reported to be Khalil al-Haya and Khaled Mashal. Meanwhile, just before the decisive meeting between President Trump and Prime Minister Netanyahu on the future of the Middle East, they have marked a new yellow line, and Hamas is left behind. However, back in Israel, we had a rough weekend, including another combined terrorist attack in the north that resulted in 2 fatalities. The attacker was an infiltrator into Israel from the Palestinian village of Kabatia in the northern Samaria area, who used his van to ram 68-year-old man and a teenager at a bus stop in the city of Bet Shean. He then continued to the Harod Valley, crashed into a vehicle near Kibbutz Tel Yosef, got out and attacked an 18-year-old girl in front of her father's eyes, fatally wounded her with a knife. From there, the terrorist fled towards Afula and wounded another victim before being neutralized by an armed passerby. The terrorist was evacuated to the hospital in moderate condition, and the IDF launched a retaliation operation against terror cells in the village that he came from. Additionally, his 2 brothers, who were also in Israel illegally, have been arrested. And meanwhile, overseas in Europe, an anti-Jewish Hamas-related terrorist cell was exposed in Italy, and 9 individuals were arrested on suspicion of raising millions of euros for Hamas. This terror cell operated under the cover of fundraising for Palestinians in Gaza. According to reports in the Italian media, amongst the detainees, the president of the Palestinians Association in Italy, whom Prime Minister Giorgia Meloni called the leader of Hamas's Italian cell. I'm Yair Pinto, and this is your Boots on the Ground report, in which we bring you the whole truth about what's happening in Israel on day 813 of the war against Hamas, Hezbollah, the Houthis in Yemen, the Shia militias in Iraq, and all the other armed groups in this region operating under the control of the Revolutionary Guards Corps in Iran, which is the head of the crumbling axis of evil in the Middle East. And a moment before we begin, I want to invite you to press on the subscribe button and share this content. We need ambassadors for the truth so that we can keep growing and bring the truth to as many people as possible. Together, with you, we will win. Now, let's get into the headlines, starting with the murderous terrorist attack that happened in northern Israel over the weekend. The important item to start with is to ask you to join us in praying for the victims of this terrorist attack and for their families, including Aviv Maor, 18 years of age, from Ein Harod, and also Shimshon Madrachi, 68 years of age, from Bet Shean, both of whom lost their lives. 2 other people were wounded in this series of attacks by the Palestinian men who had infiltrated Israel illegally and went on a rampage of violence that lasted 50 minutes. The terrorist was identified as Ahmed Abu El-Rub, aged 34, from the village of Kabatia in northern Samaria. He was ultimately neutralized at the entrance to the Afula community and evacuated to a hospital before being turned over to the Shin Bet for interrogation. A few hours after the start of the attack, security forces raided El-Rub's home in Kabatia, and his father was arrested in that location. The terrorist began his rampage at Kibbutz Misilot, where he worked for an Arab-Israeli contractor from Araba, and according to the suspicion, stole his vehicle and drove to Bet Shean, a distance of 3 minutes from the kibbutz. Shortly after arriving in the city, he rammed the vehicle into a 16-year-old boy, causing him to suffer light injuries. According to one of the residents, immediately afterwards the terrorist got out of the vehicle with a knife and tried to attack a teenager that he had just rammed, but he managed to run away. The terrorist then got back into the vehicle and fled from the scene, driving a short distance away before ramming Mordechai, 68 years of age, mortally wounding him. From there, El-Rub continued to Route 71, and near Ein Harod crashed his vehicle into another car, causing the passerbys to get out and try to run away. But according to a witness, El-Rub got out and chased them on foot, catching up to 18-year-old Aviv Maor and stabbing her. Her father was unable to stop him and had to watch the life drained from his child in front of his eyes. El-Rub then drove towards Afula, where the vehicle stopped at the Hamaalot junction at the entrance of the city. In photos from the scene, the van is seen after it crashed into an electricity pole, and there the terrorist was neutralized by an armed passerby after he had managed to wound yet another victim. Paramedics arrived at the scene and found El-Rub and his latest victim in need of attention. They were both evacuated to a nearby hospital and were listed in moderate condition. The terrorist is, as stated, a resident of Kabatia in the northern Samaria area. Over the last month, Central Command operated in the northern Samaria area in Operation 5 Stones, during which they raided hundreds of homes, arrested dozens of suspects, and also began carrying out house demolitions. According to suspicion, the terrorist stayed several days in Israel, as stated, used his employer's vehicle for the attack, and the employer, a resident of Araba, was also later arrested and transferred to the Shin Bet for interrogation. A few hours later, security forces raided the terrorist village of residents, Kabatia, located about 40 kilometers beyond the fence, and arrested there the terrorist's father, who assisted him, and 2 brothers who were found inside Israeli territory, also illegal infiltrators. And over the weekend, the IDF has been conducting extensive security operations in Kabatia. Participating in the activity are forces from the Duvdevan unit, paratroopers reconnaissance, border police, Iftach, and the Masada unit of the prison services. Amongst other things, the forces mapped the terrorist homes ahead of the process of demolishing it, and as stated, security forces arrested several suspects in terrorist activities and interrogated dozens of additional suspects on the ground. Defense Minister Israel Katz declared that every terrorist must be located and neutralized, and the terrorist infrastructure in the village must be struck. Anyone who assists terror or provides shelter and backing to terrorists will pay the full price. And speaking of terrorists paying the full price, we are now switching our focus to the Gaza Strip, where the campaign against Hamas continues. But first, I want to invite you to keep spreading the truth, share, follow us, and most importantly, don't forget to press that subscribe button so that you stay connected to what's happening here, boots on the ground style. I also want to introduce you to our partner for today's video. At Christmas, we celebrate the birth of Jesus, Yeshua. In Hebrew, Immanuel means God with us. It is a reminder that God does not remain distant from the suffering that we are going through in this earth, but enters with compassion and with love to help us all. But for many children in Israel, suffering is painfully real. And since October 7th, tens of thousands of children have endured fear, loss, and trauma that no child could ever face. Some lost their sense of safety overnight. Some carry deep emotional wounds that cannot be seen. At Shiloh Israel Children's Fund, trained professionals are walking alongside these children who their journey towards healing is just beginning. Through trauma-informed therapy, they help children process pain, rebuild trust, and rediscover safety through consistent, compassionate care. This help is not symbolic. It is happening right now. One therapy session can help a child take the first step towards healing. A month of care can restore stability. A year of support can help a child reclaim their childhood. This is faith in action and loving the last of these in a tangible, life-changing way. At Christmas, we remember that Jesus came near to the broken-hearted, and today we're invited to do the exactly same thing. So if you want to support the children of Israel that are suffering from trauma after 2 years of war, go to www.israelchildren.org/help. Again, that's www.israelchildren.org/help, and give today. Your generosity is more than a gift. It is an answer to prayers and a pathway to healing for a child in Israel. And now we're moving to the news from the Gaza Strip, as the IDF continues to destroy terrorist infrastructure, but IDF intelligence has observed over the last month that Hamas is trying to plant explosives and rehabilitate tunnels with the help of women and with children. And this is happening in areas of schools and also hospitals. They also said that the Bet Hanun neighborhood has not yet been fully cleared and that there is a possibility that terrorists are still operating there. The IDF still holds outposts on the yellow line within the range of the border, and on it, and also on this line, there are daily attempts by Hamas terrorists to provoke some kind of incident with the IDF troops, as well as attempts by Hamas to approach, collect intelligence, and then test the alertness of the soldiers in the field. It was also reported that in the IDF, they are opening new routes, establishing outposts, and clearing the area. On the side of the yellow line that is under the Israeli control, the IDF continues to destroy terrorist infrastructure and tunnels, but as for the tunnels beyond the yellow line, in the IDF, they are acting to destroy them by pumping materials into the tunnels and then taking them out of use. For instance, yesterday in Bet Hanun, a launcher with rockets ready to be launched at Sderot was found and then demolished. In related news, the IDF spokesperson's unit announced over the weekend that an attack helicopter intercepted 2 drones that tried to infiltrate Israel from Egypt. This is the first interception of this kind against drones that tried to cross from Egypt. A senior Air Force official said that the interception is as part of a deep change in the concept of the border defense, and that the Air Force control centers were established operating under the divisions to deal with low-altitude aerial threats. In another related story, the Hamas terrorist organization recently decided to hold elections for the leadership of the political bureau, for the first time since the elimination of the terrorist Yahya Sinwar in October 2024. The elections are expected to be held in the coming weeks, and according to intelligence reports, Hamas has already begun preparations within the Shura Council, which includes 50 members in 3 areas: the Gaza Strip, Judea and Samaria, and abroad. The 2 prominent candidates to head the political bureau are the terrorist Khalil al-Haya, who heads the negotiating teams of Hamas, and Khaled Mashal, Hamas's leader outside of the Gaza Strip. What do you think about that? Is it okay for a terrorist organization to have an election that completely ignores the will of the people over which it rules? Let me know what you think about this in the comments. And now, I have a general comment of my own to make, because it's obvious that Hamas is now trying to rewrite the story of the war and present itself not as a falling terrorist organization, but as the national leader of the Palestinians. One way that they're doing that is by publishing a new booklet called the Al-Aqsa Flood, 2 years of steadfastness and a will of a liberation. With the publication of this new revision of the history of the last 2 years, Hamas is trying to clean its image, as it hopes that everyone will just forget about how they launched this war against Israel, which has brought so much destruction and suffering to the Palestinian people of Gaza, with a brutal massacre of Israeli civilians, which is accompanied by cruel and barbaric atrocities. In the booklet, they justify the October 7th massacre as part of a historic struggle since the British mandate through the establishment of Israel and the failure of the Oslo Accords. They also describe the attack as a necessary response, collective punishment, and the failure of the world to force change on Israel. These are just a few of the seamless lies and the distortions that this booklet presents. It also claims that its terrorists did not deliberately harm civilians and did not commit sexual violence, despite indisputable testimonies and documentation proving it, including the videos that they themselves filmed and posted of themselves committing these atrocities on October 7th and also days after that. And beyond that, the terrorist organization, as always, almost completely ignores the question that trouble the residents of the Gaza Strip, including who will rule the day after, who will clean up the huge mess left over from this war and repair all the damage, and what the heavy price that the population paid already because of their intent to destroy Israel. Instead, Hamas focuses on blaming Israel and the United States for a war of extermination and trying to present itself as a flexible and responsible party in negotiations. There is some good news to this report, as even Palestinian journalists have sharply criticized the document and claimed that it is an attempt to mark political suicide as a national achievement. The criticism points to the tens of thousands of fatalities, massive destructions of homes and infrastructure, loss of control in Gaza, and a deep tear in society, all while Hamas celebrates so-called achievements and refuses to take responsibility for anything. It is good to know that there are still some people out there who are interested in the truth, and here at TBN Israel, we are proud of our role and our part in spreading the truth and what's happening in Israel. So if you want to help us, make sure to follow our videos, subscribe to TBN Israel, and never miss another episode of Boots on the Ground. Now, we're switching our focus to international affairs because Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu is in the United States this week for a series of meetings with President Trump and Secretary of State Marco Rubio at the Mar-a-Lago estate in Florida. At the top of the agenda for these meetings will be the situation in Gaza and the threat from Iran. Various reports indicate that Netanyahu will ask President Trump for a green light for possible military action against Iran, and will also emphasize that Israel will not move to Phase B of the ceasefire plan in Gaza until the return of the remains of the fallen hostage Ran Gaveli. To explain, the United States is pushing for a rapid progress to Phase B of President Trump's plan, including rehabilitation of the infrastructure in the Strip in parallel with the disarmament of Hamas, while in Israel they insist on dismantling Hamas's weapons before any kind of civilian move. So, what is really happening and what is ahead of us? To be very candid, there is a lot of tension going on in these meetings. Behind the smiles and the flags that are spread across the lawn of President Trump's Mar-a-Lago estate lies a list of decisions that will determine what the Middle East will look like in the coming years, and above all, what will remain of the Hamas terrorist organization and the Iranian infrastructure that feeds into it. At the heart of the conversation stands the Gaza Strip and the move to Phase B, which, as stated, is a point of disagreement, but quietly, a shared strategic line is already being formed around several key issues. To start with, Gaza's rehabilitation will begin only in territory under Israeli control and within the Yellow Line. This includes about 53% of the territory in the Gaza Strip today, with a goal to gradually expand it to about 75% of the territory if the Hamas terrorist organization continues to refuse to disarm. The idea is very straightforward. Where the IDF has control, it is possible to begin building a new Gaza, including housing, infrastructure, electricity, water, hospitals, and everything else that is needed. Where Hamas remains in control, destruction remains, including road infrastructure and dependence on limited humanitarian aid. The goal of this plan is for civilians to move gradually into the rehabilitated territory, while the neighborhoods that remain in the hands of the Hamas terrorist organization will be emptied of the regular population and will gradually become populated only by Hamas commanders and fighters. Without an official ultimatum, a process of choking Hamas will thus effectively be created. In parallel, President Trump has proposed Project Sunrise, an American rehabilitation plan that will begin in Rafah and connect to the Yellow Line. Here, the International Stabilization Force, ISF, comes in, but for now, the first soldiers of this force are expected to operate only in territory under the IDF's control. However, Israel is also sticking to a firm refusal to allow soldiers from Turkey or Pakistan to participate in this force. These two countries are not neutral, but have deep ties to the Muslim Brotherhood, of which Hamas is a franchise. Other countries which have offered to contribute troops to this force include Indonesia, Azerbaijan, and Italy, but it is unclear how many troops can be counted on from these countries and what their role in the force would be. And above all, Netanyahu is prepared to make clear to Trump that Israel will need two conditions to be met before we can move to phase B of this deal. The first, obviously, is the return of the remains of fallen hostage Sergeant Major Ran Guyali. The second condition is a real mechanism for disarming the Hamas terrorist organization, not an international show of storage of weapons in basements where Hamas can easily retrieve them when they want to. The next question on the agenda is who will rule Gaza and who will leave Gaza. The internal Israeli debate about who will be there on the day after includes discussions about the possibility of the Palestinian Authority regaining administrative control over the Gaza Strip, as well as moderate Palestinians and forces from other Arab states. These discussions have more or less run their course, and now we seem to be moving to a new plan centered around points of agreement between President Donald Trump and Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu. These points include ongoing security control of the IDF over most of the Gaza Strip. Civil administration will be provided by a Palestinian technocratic body detached from the Hamas terrorist organization and minimized in its connection to the Palestinian Authority, with people in the style of Salem Fayyad and not in the style of Abu Mazen, Mahmoud Abbas, the Palestinian Authority president. And quietly, without headlines, there are also plans to begin moves aimed at encouraging voluntary immigration of some Gazans to third-party countries, and already Somaliland is being mentioned as a possible first destination. Polls cited in Israel showed that this plan has broad support, even amongst the significant portion of opposition voters. Specifically, the insistence on the return of the remains of Ran Guyali, opposition to Turks in Gaza, opposition to rehabilitation under Hamas's control, and support for voluntary immigration are all broadly popular amongst the Israeli public. But it doesn't end there. For the security of the State of Israel, we also need to deal with Iran, with Syria, and with Lebanon. The ring around Israel and these issues will also be on the agenda when President Trump hosts Prime Minister Netanyahu at the Mar-a-Lago this week. So let's take a closer look at these issues one by one, starting with Iran. In his meetings with President Trump, Prime Minister Netanyahu will present intelligence materials showing that the Ayatollah regime is rapidly rehabilitating its ballistic missile program and the air defensive array that was damaged in previous strikes. With these reports in hand, he will ask permission from the possibility of a military action. Furthermore, in regards to Iran's renegade nuclear program, he will insist on Iran being denied uranium enrichment capability and centrifuges. Israel is also continuing to insist on intrusive oversight of Iran's program by the IAEA, the International Atomic Energy Agency, although, to be honest, that mechanism has not been very effective in the past, largely due to Iran's successful efforts to hide what it is doing from the IAEA, which obviously cannot be everywhere at once. However, Israel has no choice but to press on all levers of pressure, because although ballistic missiles are a big problem, nuclear weapons are an existential threat. Moving to Syria, Israel has warned about the army of interim President Abu Muhammad al-Julani, which includes fighters wearing ISIS patches on the uniform and making celebratory cries about being on the road to Jerusalem whenever they accomplish any kind of mission. Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu will therefore request American backing for a demilitarized southern Syria, protection of the Druze communities there, and preventing Damascus from becoming a storehouse for missiles and Russian and Iranian air defensive systems. In regards to Lebanon and to the Hezbollah terrorist organization, there is close arrangements between Washington and Jerusalem. In both capitals, officials say that the Lebanese army is moving too slowly, and Israel keeps on the table the possibility of another blow against Hezbollah if disarmament is not completed, while continuing to hold territory and preserve freedom of military action. And finally, there is Turkey and Qatar, and also the Muslim Brotherhood network. Israel defines Turkey as a rival, not an enemy, but the boundaries are very clear. Jerusalem is not willing to see Turkish soldiers patrolling refugee camps in Gaza with the tag of an international force. In the background of these discussions is Qatar, the state that a new study defines as a strategic hub of the Muslim Brotherhood and the Hamas terrorist organization, a place where plans for Israel's destructions were formulated. Money, weapons, and fighters of the Izzadin el-Qassam brigades of Hamas were sent or supported, and jihad was granted global religious legitimacy, all under the mask of Qatar presenting itself as a humanitarian mediator. Without publicly irritating the Emir of Qatar, Netanyahu and Trump will need to decide whether they keep playing this game or try something different. In summary, Israeli officials come to Florida with lines that it will not move from. These include Phase B in the Gaza Strip, without Gaveli, and without a real mechanism for disarming the Hamas terrorist organization. No soldiers from Turkey and Pakistan in any international force in the Gaza Strip, and no rehabilitation in areas where Hamas is in control. No surrender of freedom of action regarding Iran and the Hezbollah terrorist organization, and no trust in armies with ISIS symbols on the soldiers as a stabilizing factor. And with all of this in mind, we see that the future can go in two directions. Either there will be a new Gaza under the Yellow Line, a limited international force on the Ayatollah regime, and the gradual collapse of the Hamas terrorist organization, or it's another cosmetic layer on the same arena. The second possibility will see a stronger Hamas as Qatar continues to funnel money to them and Iran rehabilitates its missile arsenal, leaving the next confrontation as only a question of time. To be clear, what President Trump and Prime Minister Netanyahu decide at Mar-a-Lago won't solve all these problems in one day, but this is the first time since October 7th then one clear plan is on the table with names of enemies, red lines, and also a possible direction towards victory. And here, TBN Israel will continue to pray for every decision that comes and continue to spread the truth. Remember, this is a spiritual war, and we are calling on you to pray for wisdom to Prime Minister Netanyahu, to Donald Trump, and to all the other leaders around the world that are involved in this topic. And now, we've got just a few more things to talk about regarding Iran, because over the weekend, President Masoud Pezeshkian sharpened his remarks towards the Western world and warned that his country is in the midst of an all-out war against the United States, against Israel, and against Europe. He said these things in an interview published on the official website identified with the office of Iran's Supreme Leader, and I personally wonder if it was a mistake, because this is the kind of rhetoric that the Ayatollah regime usually tries to avoid openly stating. In any case, Pezeshkian said in the interview that we are in a full war against the United States, against Israel, and against Europe. This is a war that is harder and more complex than the Iran-Iraq war, and the enemies do not want Iran to stand on its feet. Furthermore, according to him, the current confrontation is not limited to the military arena alone, but also includes political, economic, and psychological pressure meant to undermine the stability of the regime. Only this week, an Iranian Foreign Ministry spokesperson declared regarding ballistic missiles that the goal is self-defense and deterrence, and their production is not open for negotiations. It is important to point out that Iran is still licking its wounds from Operation Rising Lion, during which, out of about 2,000 ballistic missiles it had before the war, it launched 528 towards Israel, while many more were destroyed by the Israeli airstrikes. Intelligence estimates put the arsenal that Iran has left with around 1,000 after this war, while many of the launchers and industrial production facilities were destroyed or damaged. But in Tehran, they do not intend to stop, and the declared goal is thousands of additional missiles, possibly up to a pace of up to 3,000 missiles every single year, an unprecedented number in the world. To get there, Iran is looking for what it lacks: advanced production technology. And the only place that it can get that technology is from China. Tehran approached Beijing recently with a request to purchase industrial planetary mixers, heavy equipment that makes it possible to prepare rocket fuel in quantities, refine the material composition, and greatly accelerate the pace of production. If the deal goes through, the missile plants that were damaged could rise again stronger and more efficient and feed the Iranian array with thousands of missiles within a few years. From a military standpoint, the meaning is clear. Even simple missiles of the Ahmad model and similar, with a range of about 1,700 kilometers and a warhead of hundreds of kilograms, become a systemic threat when they come in the hundreds at once. No defense system, not even the Arrow, David Sling, and Iron Dome together, can guarantee full interception of such barrages over time. From Israel's perspective, it is a challenge, not only a technological challenge, but also psychological, looking ahead to a grim prospect of life under the constant threat of recurrent barrages of rockets intended to erode the sense of security and the resilience of the home front. However, there is some good news, because building that kind of ballistic missile arsenal that Iran's leaders are talking about costs a lot of money, and it also takes other resources that Iran is running short of these days, including water and also electricity. Even the most basic Iranian ballistic missile costs several $millions before costs of the infrastructure, the new plants, the production lines, the training of manpower, and the quality control are factored in. So for an Iranian economy that is already at a low point, with a collapsing currency and critical dependence on oil revenues, investing tens of billions of dollars for new missile production capabilities in just a few years could choke the economy, harm civilian investment, and increase anger in the streets. And beyond that, to feed the plants with missile fuel, raw materials need to be delivered from the petrochemical industry that brings in foreign currency, which is currently important to Iran, since its own currency, the rial, is almost worthless, currently trading at around 1.3 million rials for one United States dollars. And now, let's talk about the other side of all of this, especially the response in Israel. To start, Israel is not going to be satisfied by adding another layer of air defense interceptors or new bomb shelters. Israel is already trying to get out ahead of the problem by blocking Iran's supply chain for these missiles and their components. There are also ongoing diplomatic pressure on China and other countries not to provide key equipment, continued covert strikes against production sites, laboratories, and also missile-fueled facilities, and deepening defensive cooperation with the United States, with Greece, and with Cyprus, and with other countries in this region. However, the big question in everybody's minds is, will we soon see a full strike by the Israeli Air Force against Iran again? Let me know what you think about this in the comment sections. And in the meantime, here at TBN Israel, we will continue to report about every development in the rain, in the sun. We are here to tell you the truth of what's happening in Israel. And now, we move to a worrying report from Italy, where police arrested 9 people on Saturday suspected of raising millions of euros for Hamas under the guise of fundraising for Palestinians in Gaza. In addition, Italian police issued arrest warrants for 2 more who are outside of Italy. Italy's Prime Minister, Giorgia Meloni, expressed her appreciation and satisfaction with the police operation, noting that amongst the detainees is also Muhammad Hanoun, the president of the Association of Palestinians in Italy, and she quoted investigators describing him as the leader of the Italian Hamas cell. Italian Interior Minister Matteo Panettadossi added that with the exposure of the affair, the curtain was lifted from behaviors and activities that supposedly were meant to help the Palestinian population, and in practice, concealed support and participation in organizations with an Islamist character. Here at TBN Israel, we'll continue to bring you the whole truth about what's happening in Israel, so please hit that subscribe button and help us reach more people around the world. And now we need you to pray. So please pray for the victims of the terrorist attack in Israel, pray for wisdom to our leaders, and keep praying for the peace of Jerusalem.